This week on the SSPX Podcast, we'll pause the Catholic Mass series for an episode of Questions with Father and a recent document that was released from the Vatican. The document is commonly known as the Bishop of Rome document. It's titled, "To Find a Way of Exercising Primacy." In it, the Holy Father makes some curious remarks about ecumenism, referring to himself, for instance, as the gravest obstacle on the path of ecumenism. So, what are we to think of this? What is the answer to ecumenism? And has the teaching of the Church changed? And why are we doing a whole episode on this document when many documents are released all the time? On sspxpodcast.com/questions, you'll be able to find all of our Questions with Father episodes and resources. And this is free to listen to and always will be, but if you can help with a one-time or a small monthly recurring donation, you'll be helping us out immensely. Now, let's join Father Paul Robinson for Questions with Father, episode number 50. Hello, Father Robinson. We've had you a few times here recently. How are you doing besides having so much extra time that you want to do like 3 podcasts in the past week?
Yeah, I've got the podcasting fever. Yeah, it's sort of a break in the priest training program right now. We had one graduate of the priest training program, and then we have one priest who's done 1 year out of the 2 years, and then we have a third priest that is to join us in a couple weeks. So,
fantastic.
I've got a little bit of an interval here, and taking the opportunity to discuss some things that I think are really relevant to the traditionalist movement in the SSPX.
Absolutely. Well, always glad to have you, for sure. And today this is a Questions with Father episode, and there's several questions behind this, but there was a document that came out recently here in June, and usually summer is kind of a quiet time in the Vatican, but it seems like the past few summers have not been. But there's this document that came out. It's called The Bishop of Rome, Primacy and Synodality in the Ecumenical Dialogues and the Responses to the Encyclical Ut Unum Sint. It sounds like just another document from the Vatican. I guess first off, can you explain what this document is kind of in broad terms and why we should care about it and why we're doing a podcast about it?
Yeah, I think this document is very interesting. It's a study document. There was a press conference that came out on June the 13th, and it said that there's this document that's coming out from the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity, and that it's a study document, and that it was published with the approval of Pope Francis, and that it summarizes the responses to John Paul II's encyclical letter Ut Unum Sint. So this was an encyclical that was released in 1995, first encyclical by a pope explicitly about ecumenism. And Ut Unum Sint was soliciting some sort of feedback from non-Catholics, the Christian non-Catholics, about how to further the ecumenical efforts with the Catholic Church. So there's a study document that appeared this past summer, and this document is very, very interesting for us as traditional Catholics, and specifically with the SSPX, because we make the claim that the Council itself, in 3 specific areas, changed Catholic doctrine. And there are others who say, the neoconservatives would say, well, no, there's no errors in the Council documents themselves, but it was just the implementation of the documents that was wrong, was heterodox. And this document traces a line of continuity from the Second Vatican Council up to the present moment of this effort to effectively change the primacy of the Pope for ecumenical purposes. So it's nothing less than saying we want to change the nature of the papacy in order to favor ecumenical relations with Christian non-Catholic religions. And by doing so, effectively confirming what we've been saying all along, that the Council did change Catholic doctrine in certain areas. So that's why I think it's helpful. And so what I would like to do, Andrew, today is maybe you and I can just look at the 1928 encyclical of Mortalium Animos, some passages of this encyclical by Pope Pius XI, and which gives the authentic Catholic teaching on the Protestant ecumenical movement. And then take a look at the introduction to this Bishop of Rome document and compare and see what's going on and ask ourselves, okay, what do we have here? Do we have here merely a sort of deepening of the church's teaching, or do we have just an outright contradiction? And specifically, do we have churchmen today who are trying to change the church as established by Christ? Mm-hmm. Because obviously the papacy is something that comes from our Lord himself. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Our Lord established the church as a monarchy with a single head. And so that's an element of the church that is divine and so cannot be changed by man. No one has the power to change that. Even though democracy is the rage today, they can't change the church into a democracy because that's not what Christ established. So we have to ask ourselves, is that what they're trying to do? Because of the fact that Protestants don't like a monarchical church. They don't want to submit to a pope. And in order to make them happy, we have to rethink the nature of the papacy. Is that what's going on?
Yeah. And it is interesting. There's so many different tangents we could go on before we even start with this. But I think the main point and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is this movement in the modern church kind of brought on, kind of invented, so to speak, by Pope Benedict, where he was trying to do what was called the hermeneutic of continuity. And we have an episode on that in the Crisis in the Church series that you can go back and visit. But his concept was, no, nothing's really changed. We just have to interpret the things of Vatican II in the light of tradition, and then there's continuity. And your argument here, Father, is there are substantial changes. There are hermeneutical ruptures, to use big words, but there's a break in this tradition between what was said before and what is being said now. And this document is yet one more example of that.
Yeah, this is a kind of like a smoking gun document of that. And of course, people characterize the pontificate of Pope Benedict XVI as a hermeneutic of continuity pontificate, where Pope Benedict XVI, he said, we do have to reconcile current teaching with past teaching. And so he made a great effort to do that. I would argue that he was unsuccessful. And to this day, there's this sort of promissory note given to us that they're going to reconcile documents like Dignitatis Humanae with the Constitution of the Church. But it's never really been established how that's possible. But then the pontificate of Pope Francis is just outright hermeneutic of rupture. I mean, it's obvious he not only is not making an effort to reconcile current teaching with past teaching, but he thinks it's perfectly okay to make it really clear that this current teaching is different. For instance, with the change of the catechism on the death penalty, where he just says, we're just going to write the opposite of what we said in the past.
Yeah.
And move forward. And I'll just quote myself, and that's sufficient.
Yeah.
To establish that. Yeah. And
the code word that you always see, again, maybe one more little tangent before we get started. One code word that you always see is development of doctrine. The modern church likes to say, or modern churchmen, like to say, we're just going to study this, and it's a development of doctrine. And they're trying to tell us that it's all organic and that this is a natural shift. But there's this effort to say, well, it's just an organic change. Everything's fine. But when you see modern churchmen say development of doctrine, what they're actually saying is we're changing doctrine. Yes.
Yeah. And there's also the phrase deeper awareness. We've attained a deeper awareness. But the thing is, if their deeper awareness is the contradiction of what was taught before, it's not a deeper awareness. It's a new awareness. Mm-hmm. It's a different awareness. So that's what's really tricky about this, and what we'll see is that they use the same words. So they're going to use the word primacy. The word primacy has always been used, but we're going to still use the word primacy. But we're going to, at the same time, change the meaning of what we mean by the word primacy. So externally, it may seem we have a continuity, but in fact, we've changed the very meaning of the word.
Right.
Yeah.
They're using equivocal words that. Yeah, one thing does not mean the other.
Yeah, you're equivocating.
Yeah.
You're equivocating. So let's visit this Mortalia Manualis. I got this book here, Popes Against the Modern Errors, which has a lot of the anti-liberal documents of the Pope. So I'm going to go to Mortalia Anonymous, encyclical by Pius XI, 1928, to paragraph 7. So this whole encyclical is about the Protestant ecumenical movement. And it's the Pope of the Catholic Church speaking to Catholics, speaking to the bishops, and saying to them, answering the question that they're asking him. And they're asking him, Your Holiness, may we as Catholics enter into this ecumenical movement that was started by the Protestants. The Protestants, they notice that the church has a very solid unity, unity in faith, worship, and government. They don't have that unity. They're very divided. So they say, well, we have to try to find a way to obtain a unity similar to the Catholics. So they start the ecumenical movement. So in paragraph 7, he's going to explain that they precisely translate, they interpret the ut unum sint of our Lord. Ut unum sint means that they may be one. That they interpret this verse in a false way. So I'm just going to read this paragraph. He says, here it will be opportune to expound and reject a certain false opinion which lies at the root of this question and of that complex movement by which non-Catholics seek to bring about the union of Christian churches. Those who favor this view constantly quote the words of Christ, that they all may be one, and that there shall be one fold and one shepherd, in the sense that Christ thereby merely expressed the desire or a prayer which as yet has not been granted. For they hold that the unity of faith and government, which is a note of the one true Church of Christ, has up to the present time hardly ever existed and does not exist today. They consider that this unity is indeed to be desired and may even, by cooperation and goodwill, be actually attained, but that meanwhile it must be regarded as a mere ideal. The Church, they say, is of its nature divided into sections, composed of several churches or distinct communities which still remain separate, and although holding in common some articles of doctrine, nevertheless differ concerning the remainder, that all these enjoy the same rights, and that the Church remained one and undivided at the most only from the apostolic age until the first ecumenical councils. Hence, they say, controversies and long-standing differences which today still keep asunder the members of the Christian family must be entirely set aside, and from the residue of doctrines, a common form of faith must be drawn up and proposed for belief, in the profession of which all may not only know, but also feel themselves to be brethren. If the various churches or communities were united in some kind of universal federation, they would then be in a position to oppose resolutely and successfully the progress of their religion. So there's a lot to unpack there, but he starts off by saying that they're constantly quoting our Lord as saying that they may all be one, and saying that this means that Christ is praying that the church may sometime in the future be unified, but that it is not unified, that Christ did not found a unified church. And for Pius XI, this is false. The church has always had unity and always will have unity. You know, this is one of the marks of the church, the unity of the church, one holy Catholic apostolic. So the oneness is the church, the fact that the church is unified in her doctrine, everybody believes the same thing, unified in her government, everybody submits to the same head, and unified in the worship, everybody has the same worship, we all do the Mass. That's Catholic worship. Mm-hmm. So he's saying, they're interpreting it as saying that, well, we have to strive to attain unity, that the Church of Christ has to somehow strive to attain unity over time. And as Catholics, we can't accept that. That's basically saying that the church has failed. The church is not one. So that's why the Pope will later on go on to say you can't enter into this ecumenical movement. Catholics can't be a part of this ecumenical movement. But then if the Protestants say, well, we're not one, Christ wants us to strive to be one, how are we going to do that? Mm-hmm. Well, they're going to try to mimic, to some degree, the unity that exists in the Catholic Church. They're going to try to mimic the unity of faith. How are they going to mimic the unity of faith? Well, they're going to have a call a meeting. They're going to say, okay, Baptists, Presbyterians, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, whoever. I don't know who they're going to get in there.
Right.
Have a meeting, and everybody's going to talk and dialogue with one another, and they're going to say, hey, Andrew, you're a Mormon. Tell me what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll say, hey, Father Robinson, you're an Anglican priest. What do you believe? And we're going to chat and share our beliefs. And then we're going to say, hey, wait a second. We believe some of the same things.
Yeah.
You believe there's one God. I believe there's one God. Maybe what we can do is we can just talk about what we agree upon.
Yeah.
And maybe we can draw up a document that says what we agree upon and sign that document and say, we all subscribe to this profession of faith. And then we can say, hey, we're one.
Right.
We can call ourselves brethren. We're brothers in the faith.
Yeah. And it is interesting because the truth that exists, and again, we've talked about this in other series, but the truth that exists in Presbyterian Church, Mormon Church, etc., laundry list here, does not exist because of those religions, because of those creeds. They exist, the truth that they may have, the bits and pieces of truth that they may have, exist because they are carrying on the truth of the Catholic Church, and they just so happen to carry in some of those aspects of the creed. It's not because of the Mormon faith that they have the truth. It's because of the carryover from the Catholic Church. And so you can't really be one in that way. Yeah.
Well, obviously the Mormons are way out there, and maybe Presbyterians will get a few more things right. But one of the things that Pius XI points out is that effectively what these people are saying is they're saying, all right, Christ came on this earth and he revealed this set of doctrines to us. But what we're going to say is that, well, we don't have to believe everything that he taught. We don't have to agree about everything that he taught. But what we're going to do is we're going to say there's some primary doctrines and some secondary doctrines. And we're going to agree on the primary doctrines, and that just happens to be whatever we agree upon, and the secondary doctrines, we're going to say they're optional. But the Pope says, no, if it comes from God, it's not optional. You can't say to God, it's like, well, this thing that you revealed to me, I'm all on board with that. But this other thing you revealed to me about marriage being indissoluble, I'm not really down with that. Right. It's just not me. So in my group, me and my group, we want to be followers of Christ without being complete followers of Christ, and still be legit, and still be recognized as a church in a proper religion. Yeah. So this is just selling short the revelation of God, who is truth himself, and saying, well, the divine truths you can pick and choose.
Yeah. I mean, it would kind of be like saying, the Israel-Hamas conflict that's ongoing right now. Well, the Israeli leader, he wants peace. The Hamas leader wants peace. Oh, well, then we agree. We're all one. Oh, no. There are very big differences between the two. You can't just say that we're the same anymore. So it's an extreme example, but the principle's there.
Yeah, it's certainly very, very superficial. So the next paragraph in Mortalium Animalis really gets to the heart of what we need to talk about today in regards to the papal authority and the ecumenical movement. And I don't know if you have Mortalium Animos there, Andrew. You wouldn't mind reading that next paragraph in paragraph 8.
Sure. So this, venerable brethren, is what is commonly said. There are some indeed who recognize and affirm that Protestantism, as they call it, has rejected, with a great lack of consideration, certain articles of faith and some external ceremonies, which are in fact pleasing and useful, and which the Roman Church still retains. They soon, however, go on to say that the Church has also erred and corrupted the official religion by adding and proposing for belief certain doctrines which are not only alien to the gospel, but even repugnant to it. Among the chief of these, they number that which concerns the primacy of jurisdiction, which was granted to Peter and to his successors in the See of Rome. Among them, indeed, are some, though few, who grant to the Roman pontiff a primacy of honor or even a certain jurisdiction or power, but this, however, they consider not to arise from the divine law, but from the consent of the faithful. Others, again, even go so far as to wish the pontiff himself to preside over their motley, so to say, assemblies. But all the same, although many non-Catholics may be found who loudly preach fraternal communion in Christ Jesus, yet you will find none at all to whom it ever occurs to submit and obey the vicar of Jesus Christ, either in his capacity as a teacher or as a governor. Meanwhile, they affirm that they could willingly treat with the Church of Rome, but on equal terms, that is, equals with an equal. But even if they could so act, it does not seem open to doubt that any pact into which they might enter would not compel them to turn from those opinions which are still the reason why they err and stray from the one fold of Christ.
Okay. So these Protestant ecumenical movement, they turn their eyes towards the Catholic Church, and they look at the Catholic Church, and they're like, okay, yeah, they got some nice ceremonies and so on, and perhaps it would be wrong to reject all these ceremonies, but there's some things that they just get totally wrong, and they've corrupted the original gospel. And the main doctrine that they really get wrong is the doctrine of papal primacy. This idea that Christ established a visible church with a visible head, who's above all the faithful and who governs the faithful and to whom all must submit. And so they say to the Catholic Church, it's like, look, you have corrupted the original faith. This is not established by Christ. If you want to be like chummy with us and you want to be brethren with us, brothers with us, you have to change your doctrine on papal primacy. And hey, we're willing to give you a little bit by saying, we'll let the Pope come to our meeting and we'll give him a primacy of honor. He will be the first among peers. So he'll get to lead the meeting, he'll get to preside at the meeting, but he will not be the one who's governing the Church of Christ. He would just be given a primacy of honor. It won't be a primacy of real jurisdiction. And that we're going to say that he has this primacy of honor not by a divine right. It's not like God's given him this primacy of honor. It's just by a vote. We voted and we put him in. It was a democratic process. We decided that, okay, you're going to be the one to lead the meeting.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to do it. Yeah. So, and then of course the Pope says that it doesn't occur to them that the best way to foster unity is really just to submit to the Pope that Christ established. Why don't you just submit to the church? Why don't you just come into the church? That is the real way in which the Catholic Church has always sought to foster unity. It's said to those who are outside the church, come into the fold, get on the bark of Peter and save your souls. This is the true church. There is no other. We're going to retain our doctrines because these come from Christ. You can't be saved without these doctrines. The false doctrines that you have will lead you to damnation. So you have to embrace the true doctrines and come into the true church for you to save your soul. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, your soul is in grave danger of damnation. And they're not into that option.
Right.
They're not real keen on that possibility.
Right. The unity of the church exists because of the unity of Christ and the church. It's not a unity of multiple churches. It's a unity of Christ with his church. Yeah.
It's a unity under God. It's not a unity that's by a human compact or human agreement. They're humanizing the whole realm of faith. They're making something supernatural natural, and saying, well, let's just get together, have a meeting, agree upon something, and then we've got salvation. Like you're making it yourself. Right. You're not submitting to God. You're just creating your own path to heaven.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then. The very first words of the next paragraph, he says, this being so, it is clear that the Apostolic See can by no means take part in these assemblies, nor is it in any way lawful for Catholics to give to such enterprises their encouragement or support. If they did so, they would be giving countenance to a false Christianity quite alien to the one Church of Christ. Shall we commit the iniquity of suffering the truth revealed by God to be made a subject for compromise? So that's his conclusion. It's like, no, you can't have anything to do with this.
Yeah,
we can't have it. This is to sell short the true Church of Christ and to sell short the revelation, the truths brought to us by Jesus Christ. We would lose everything if that happened.
Right. And modern world would see us as not being nice. But it's not about nice. It's about holding fast to the truth.
Anybody who holds fast to any truths has to be willing not to budge at a given point. I mean, like the famous story of the guy who says, my position is there is no truth. And the next person says, well, is that true? You're taking a stand on that?
Yeah.
So just out of apparently superficially being a nice guy. So this document, this Mortalium Animos, is so striking in relation to what happened less than 40 years ago, 40 years later, less than 40 years after this encyclical appeared. You have the Second Vatican Council.
Mm-hmm.
So let's turn to this Bishop of Rome document and evaluate it with an open mind and say to ourselves, what do we have here? Do we have a deepening of the Catholic doctrine, a development of Catholic doctrine, or do we have something that's contradicting and trying to change Catholic doctrine while still retaining the same words?
Okay.
So the very introduction, the title of the introduction is a quotation from Ut Unum Sint, and it's already very instructive. The title is "To Find a Way of Exercising Primacy."
To find a way.
To find a way. It's like we don't know how to exercise primacy. We've been doing this 2,000 years, not 20,000, but 2,000 years.
There goes Father Robinson with all of his weirdness about the age of the earth. Sorry, I'll stop.
Yeah, that would be a great tangent. Yeah. But so we need to discover a new way of exercising primacy. Yeah. This is the point of this document. So paragraph 1 says the following: the understanding and exercise of the ministry of the Bishop of Rome entered a new phase with the Second Vatican Council. The understanding of what the Pope is. So entered a new phase. The very act of calling a council with Christian unity as one of its primary goals, and with the participation of other Christians, already indicated St. John the 23rd's approach to the role of the Bishop of Rome in the Church. Complementing the definitions of the First Vatican Council on papal primacy, the Constitution Lumen Gentium strengthened the office of bishops who govern their particular churches as vicars and ambassadors of Christ and not as vicars of the Roman pontiffs, and emphasized the significance of episcopal collegiality. The decree Unitatis Redintegratio marked the official entry of the Catholic Church into the ecumenical movement and opened the way to the establishment of theological dialogues, many of which would address the question of primacy. Okay, so here you have the document stating at the very outset that in the documents of the Second Vatican Council, you have two changes of Catholic doctrine. First of all, you have Lumen Gentium teaching that the bishops are vicars and ambassadors of Christ, not vicars of the Roman pontiffs. So this is the error of collegiality, this idea that the bishops receive jurisdiction directly from the Pope. Directly from Christ and not from the Pope. They receive their jurisdiction by their ordination as bishops and not by a decision of the Pope. So what this does is it makes the church more like an oligarchy. So the bishops rule together with the Pope instead of a monarchy where they're under the Pope and they receive their governing power from the Pope. He's saying they receive their governing power just by their ordination. So that's collegiality. But then this last sentence of paragraph 1 is really striking. The decree Unitatis Redintegratio marked the official entry of the Catholic Church into the ecumenical movement. We just read Mortalium Animos saying we can't be a part of this movement.
Yep.
And then this is saying that, Unitatis Redintegratio, just trying to figure out what year that was of the council. So it was 1964.
64, yeah.
64, Unitatis Redintegratio, the church saying, we're going to be part of the ecumenical movement. And therefore, we're going to adopt this false mindset that it's okay to compromise doctrine, compromise the revelation of Christ, compromise the primacy of Peter. And in order to be a part of this, we're going to cheapen the role of the one true Church of Christ.
It strikes me as so and disrespectful to the previous teachings, to the previous bulwarks of the popes ahead of time, to say, yeah, good. You did all that. We have a new understanding now. Like modern man with all of his enlightenment has the new way of thinking now. It strikes me, I kind of get a little annoyed, and maybe that's a good thing, but it's like, why do you have to invent something new? We've got it. We have all of these teachings. We have these encyclicals. Why do you think that we have the ability to see what previous popes for the last 2,000 years or 20,000 years haven't seen?
I mean, there's a great disrespect to the history of the church, to tradition, and also to our Lord.
Yeah.
By saying, okay, we're going to enter a new phase. We're going to rethink the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, as if they can do better than our Lord.
Yeah.
What our Lord established.
Yeah. And if you weren't annoyed enough, paragraph 2 of this document, I'm looking at the part that you underlined for this podcast.
Yeah.
That one kind of raises my hackles a little bit.
Yeah. Would you mind reading that paragraph?
Sure. So paragraph 2 of this: during and after the council, successive popes have made significant contributions to this development. Convinced that, quote, the Pope is undoubtedly the gravest obstacle on the path of ecumenism, end quote, St. Paul VI, by his gestures and statements, contributed in many ways to a new understanding of papal ministry. Already in his encyclical Ecclesiam Suam, he expressed the conviction that his pastoral office of unity is, quote, not a supremacy of spiritual pride and a desire to dominate mankind, but a primacy of service, ministration, and love, end quote. Through a number of meetings, he developed fraternal relations with other Christian leaders, which helped to establish the Catholic Church within the fellowship of Christian communions. Aware that the ecumenical credibility of the Catholic Church depends on its internal capacity for renewal, Paul VI, implementing a proposal raised by the bishops at Vatican II, instituted in 1965 the Synod of Bishops to provide for a more collegial way of exercising primacy for the good of the entire Church. See Motu Proprio Apostolica Solicitudo from 1965, and made episcopal conferences mandatory in that in another Motu Proprio Ecclesia Sancte from 1966.
Okay, so what got your hackles up there, Andrew?
That first part where it says, the Pope is undoubtedly the gravest obstacle on the path of ecumenism.
Yeah, and in the past we would say, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You need to join the church. Yeah. You need to submit to the Pope. Come into the church. Come into the one true Church of Christ. We would love to have you. But now they're saying, wow, we need to do something about this. What are we going to do? They don't like the Pope being the Pope.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure out a way to make them happy about our office of the papacy in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Like, well, how is this possible?
I mean, and instead of seeing the Holy Father as the solution to true unity, they see him as the problem or the stumbling block.
Yeah. Yeah. The way the papacy is characterized, it's almost like in this quote from Ecclesiam Suam, they're saying the popes of the past were exercising the supremacy of spiritual pride and desire to dominate mankind.
Right.
But wanting to holding this position, being the head of the Church of Christ, somehow is an act of spiritual pride. There's an indirect slamming of the exercise of the papacy in the past. That gets my hackles up for sure.
Yeah.
But this, you see, the first paragraph is saying this is what Vatican II said, and now we're going to go through each of the popes. We're going to start with the Pope of the Council, Paul VI, and then we go to John Paul II in paragraph 3. It says, St. John Paul II not only reaffirmed this ecumenical path, but also officially invited other Christians to reflect on the exercise of the ministry of the Bishop of Rome. In his milestone encyclical letter, Ut Unum Sint of 1995, he used the biblical notion of episcopine, keeping watch, to describe this ministry whose primacy is defined as a ministry of unity and a service of love. And these are phrases from Ut Unum Sint. Assuming his particular ecumenical responsibility and, quote, heeding the request made of him, unquote, John Paul II recognized the need, quote, to find a way of exercising the primacy, which, while in no way renouncing what is essential to its mission, is nonetheless open to a new situation, end quote, from Ut Unum Sint, paragraph 95. Convinced that a mutually acceptable ministry of unity cannot be defined unilaterally, he extended an open invitation to all pastors and theologians from the different ecclesial traditions, repeating a request already made in 1987 in St. Peter's Basilica in the presence of the ecumenical patriarch Demetrios I. Quote, I insistently pray the Holy Spirit to shine his light upon us, enlightening all the pastors and theologians of our churches, that we may seek, together, of course, the forms in which this ministry may accomplish a service of love recognized by all concerned, end quote. Thanks to this distinction between the nature of primacy and the temporal forms in which it is exercised, it was hoped that through, quote unquote, a patient and fraternal dialogue, the, quote, will of Christ for his church, quote unquote, would be unveiled.
So we don't have Christ's will for his church yet, but through chatting with other folks, we can discern it together. We can journey together on a synodal path, maybe.
Right. Yeah. So we need to go to the leaders of the other religions and the members of the other religions and say to them, hey, what do you think about this whole primacy thing that we've been exercising for the past 2,000 years? What do you think we should do? How do you think, what's the Bishop of Rome to you?
Mm-hmm.
How do you conceive his office? How do you think he should comport himself in his office as Bishop of Rome?
Mm.
And notice how they try to say that they're going to keep the essential and just change the accidentals. So John Paul II is certainly on that hermeneutical continuity path. He's going to try to square the circle. He's going to say, well, we're going to keep what is essential and yet be open to a new situation. But we're going to try to come up with a mutually acceptable ministry of unity by talking with the members of non-Catholic religions and also still be able to say the Pope is the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of wondering, is this possible?
Yeah.
Is this even possible? Well, we would argue that they've already sold away the papacy. You know, by entering into the ecumenical movement, they've already given up on the true papacy and the true Church of Christ.
Yeah.
They've surrendered their duty to call people to come into the one true Church of Christ by just saying, okay, we're willing to dialogue with you and we're willing to get into this exercise of finding some sort of common denominator of beliefs, and call one another brethren. I'll call your church a church, you'll call my church a church, that sort of thing. And we'll together fight against irreligion.
Yeah. The thing that's very striking to me about that paragraph is where he says, we are in no way renouncing what's essential to its mission, meaning the primacy of the Pope. We're open to a new situation. But couldn't you argue that the holding fast to the truth and to what has been revealed and the papacy itself and being the vicar of Christ is essential to the mission of the Pope? And so if you let that go, then the mission of the Pope is, then you lose the essentials.
Yeah, that's what we say. That's our argument, that they've lost the essentials, unfortunately,
mm-hmm.
by falling into these errors, not holding on to the deposit of the faith.
Yeah.
All right, would you like to read that next paragraph about Benedict XVI?
Sure. So paragraph 4, Pope Benedict XVI, in his first address, spoke of himself assuming, quote, as his primary commitment, that of working tirelessly towards the reconstitution of the full and visible unity of all Christ's followers, end quote. He recalled and renewed John Paul II's invitation in different contexts, with the conviction that, quote, the ideas put forth by Pope John Paul II in the encyclical Ut Unum Sint on the distinction between the nature and the form of the exercise of primacy can yield further fruitful discussion points, end quote, and encouraged theological dialogue on the relationship between primacy and synodality, especially with the Orthodox Church. His resignation from papal office in 2013, the first resignation of a pope in modern times, recognizing, quote, my incapacity to adequately fulfill the ministry entrusted to me, end quote, contributed to a new perception and understanding of the ministry of the Bishop of Rome.
Yeah, I don't have much on Pope Benedict XVI, but it is clear that he is completely on board with this ecumenical effort. You know that he did a meeting to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the CZ1 that people call CZ3 in 2011. So, yeah, he supported the encyclical Unum Sint, and he definitely didn't, in no way did he said, hey, we're going back to Mortalium Animos.
Right.
All of you people who are outside the Catholic Church is not going to be a part of your ecumenical movement. We're not going to do dialogue anymore. We're just going to say, hey, accept the teachings of the Catholic Church, which are the teachings of Christ. He didn't do that. He's just like, okay, let's continue.
Yeah. And it is striking because we have, I think many traditional Catholics have a little bit of a fondness in a lot of ways for the papacy of Pope Benedict XVI. I mean, he loosened restrictions on the traditional mass, et cetera. But we also, and again, we're not just trying to bash on one of the vicars of Christ, but we have to remember that he was there at Vatican II. He's part of this broader problem in the church.
Yeah, and the sort of the scandals with regards to the mass, or like the changing catechism, the Pachamama scandal, and all that. Those are very grave things. But the more serious problem is the deviation in doctrine. Mm-hmm. That's the most serious problem. We have to remember that that's not the domain exclusively of Pope Francis. It's Paul VI. It's John Paul II, Benedict XVI. They all swallow this Vatican II Kool-Aid that changes the constitution of the church. Mm-hmm. And that's the real problem. That's the heart of why we have a crisis in the church today. Mm-hmm. Whereas these other things kind of manifestations, it plays out differently in each of the pontificates, but they all accept those changes of doctrine.
Yeah, they're symptoms. They're not the problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so paragraph 5 says, and it moves now to Pope Francis. Pope Francis has reiterated several times the invitation of Pope John Paul II to find a new way of exercising primacy, recognizing that we have made little progress in this regard. Quote from Evangelii Gaudium, paragraph 32. Calling for a pastoral conversion of the papacy and the central structures of the Catholic Church, he acknowledges that, quote, excessive centralization, rather than proving helpful, complicates the Church's life and her missionary outreach, unquote, and especially laments the insufficient elaboration of the status of episcopal conferences. For Pope Francis, quote, today the Patron ministry cannot be fully understood without this openness to dialogue with all believers in Christ, end quote. Making synodality a key theme of his pontificate, Pope Francis stresses the importance of a synodality grounded on the sensus fidei of the people of God, quote, infallible in credendo, unquote, from Evangelii Gaudium, which is essential for a renewed understanding and exercise of the Patrine ministry, as he stated in his address for the 50th anniversary of the Synod of Bishops. Quote, in a synodal church, greater light can be shed on the exercise of the Patrine primacy. Indeed, the Pope is not by himself above the church, but within it as one of the baptized, and within the college of bishops as a bishop among bishops, called at the same time as successor of Peter, to lead the Church of Rome, which presides in charity over all the churches, end quote. The commitment of Pope Francis to build a synodal church at all levels has significant ecumenical implications. Firstly, because synodality is a gift we can learn from other Christians, and also because synodality and ecumenism are processes of walking together. Pope Francis sees the renewed practice of the Synod of Bishops, including a broader consultation of the whole people of God, as a, quote, contribution to the reestablishment of unity among all Christians, end quote, and in itself a response to the desire years ago expressed by John Paul II in Unum Sint. The many references to Episcopal Conference teachings in his magisterial documents, such as Evangelii Gaudium, Amoris Laetitia, and Laudato Si, also witnesses his synodal commitment. Lastly, in line with the pastoral practice of his recent predecessors, the emphasis of Pope Francis on his title of Bishop of Rome from the beginning of his pontificate, the other pontifical titles now being listed as historical, also contributes to a new image of the Patron ministry.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is a new image.
Yeah. So, wow. You have there just the setting out of all of Pope Francis's efforts to find this new way of exercising primacy, which was expressed by John Paul II in Ut Unum Sint.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to do it? We're going to really increase synodality in the church, right?
Yeah.
And Pope Francis even reaches the point of kind of redefining the Pope to some degree. And this is really bewildering. You know, this is the sentence that I underlined, where he says the Pope is not by himself above the church, but is like within it as one of the baptized. So he's not above the church. So how is he the head of the church then?
Right.
But he does lead the church. He's not above it, but he leads it.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to me to say that in fact it's kind of an elective office. It's not coming from God. You know, it's if he's not above the church. It's for me, it's saying two contradictory things, and the only way I can resolve those two contradictions is by saying, well, he's in fact ahead only as a first among peers, but not as the divinely constituted authority.
And it is interesting because this is the same argument that the church has solved before, that the church has suffered through before with the schism of the Orthodox churches 1,000 years prior, where they were arguing the same thing. And the popes back then said, no, we are not equals. There is a primacy. We are not just brother bishops and there's a place of honor. The church has been through this before. We've solved it before. And now we're the ones who are saying the same thing that the Orthodox said 1,000 years ago, in a sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like, have we become the Orthodox Church now?
Mm-hmm.
And we're all somehow part of a broader, bigger church. Because, you know, one of the catchphrases from the Second Vatican Council that this also ties into is that famous phrase, the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church. So we're broadening the boundaries of the church. We've got a bigger tent, and to include all these other people, we have to reduce the Pope and make him a first among peers instead of making him the one head of the true church, where you have unity of faith, doctrine, and government. So all these errors tie together.
Yeah.
So the next few paragraphs are not as important. There's 11 paragraphs in the document. The introduction goes on to give the purpose of the document, structure of the document. You know, it's just an introduction, and it speaks about the responses to the invitation of John Paul II in Unum Sint. You know, where he says, we want to get your input on the primacy of Peter. We want to hear what you think about the primacy of Peter. And they collected those responses, and those responses were published. Would you mind reading paragraph 7?
Sure. So number 7, the 2001 plenary session of the then Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity discussed the current state of ecumenical reflection on the exercise of the Petrine ministry. On that occasion, a working paper was prepared, reporting the main elements of the current discussion. as they emerged from the official or non-official theological dialogues on Petrine ministry and from the various responses to Pope John Paul II's request. Some considerations and suggestions by the plenary session were added to the paper under the title, quote, Suggestions of the Plenary Concerning the Study on Petrine Ministry. The paper was published in the official bulletin of the Pontifical Council and sent to a large number of church leaders and ecumenical partners, especially to those who had already sent a response to Ut Unum Sint, in order to share the reflection and to continue the dialogue.
Okay, so the encyclical is 1995. 6 years later, they have this plenary session. They gather all the responses to the encyclical, and they effectively assemble them in one document, and they then send out the responses to everybody who responded. He said, okay, we're going to let you see what everybody said in response to Ut Unum Sint. Then it fast forwards to 2022, and it says that the dicastery of promoting Christian unity saw in the 25th anniversary of the encyclical Ut Unum Sint, as well as in the synodal process for the 16th Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops entitled For a Synodal Church, an opportunity to resume the discussion on this topic. Indeed, since 2001, popes have made further statements and further responses to the encyclical, and new documents of theological dialogues have been published. All these documents have made a significant contribution to the reflection on the question of primacy in the Church and deserve to be taken up in an ongoing dialogue. Moreover, the pontificate of Pope Francis has opened new perspectives for a synodal exercise of primacy. A harvesting of the fruits of these developments and the ecumenical reflections on the Bishop of Rome, primacy and synodality, seem timely and can contribute to renewed interest in Christian unity. So there's something that kind of strikes me with this, this very elaborate process and difficult process of like soliciting opinions, say, what do you think? Let's gather the opinions, let's get them together, let's send them back out and say, this is what everybody said. And you guys are making a totally significant contribution to this. Let's keep the dialogue going. Let's keep discussing. And my question is, okay, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
And above all, are we going to reach any kind of finality in this discussion? Are we ever going to reach any conclusion to this?
No, because when you're not working with sound principles, there is no finality.
I mean, do they even want to reach any closure with this discussion?
No. Yeah.
I don't know that they do. I don't know that they do. Because then you just stop dialoguing and you enforce what you've decided, right?
And we can't do that.
We can't do that. Plus, you're saying, like, we now know the truth. We've established what the truth is. And once you say that, you have to adhere to the truth. Mm-hmm. And you have to bind people to the truth. But they don't want to do that. So I think what we're discovering, what this manifests, is that the synodal process and the process of dialogue and the process of ecumenism is not really about finding the truth. It's just about the journey. It's not about the destination. There's not going to be any conclusions reached. There's just going to be this continued chaos in the church where there's a kind of a ruling the church without ruling the church. There's just talking around in circles. There's all this jargon and mumbo jumbo that comes out, but really does not establish anything, while at the same time it effectively undermines the primacy of the church, of the Pope.
Yeah,
I think that's the reality of the situation.
It's kind of like a line from a cheesy movie, right? It's not about the destination; it's about the friends we made along the way. I mean, that's kind of how I see the church as it's acting today. It's all about development and dialogue and all this stuff. And they're missing the essential.
Yeah. Where we're going. We're not going anywhere. We're just walking together.
We're journeying. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. We don't know where we're going. It's just, yeah. Mm-hmm. So endless dialogue without any conclusions. We'll just continually solicit opinions from people around the world, non-Catholics, see what they think about the primacy without ever having them come to the one true Church of Christ.
Yeah.
Which is really sad.
Yeah, it is. It reminds me, it was a few months ago, Bishop Fillet was down here at our chapel, and he gave a presentation to the Holy Name Society, the men's group. And this was shortly after the document about blessing same-sex marriages. And His Excellency was almost pleading with us men, saying, don't lose sight. Yes, this is bad. This is a problem. But don't focus on this. The problem is not, what was the document called? I forget.
Fiducia supplicans?
The issue is not fiducia supplicans. The issue is doctrine. The issue is the changing of doctrine. And I think actually he was referring to this document that was due to come out or about to come out. He goes, they are changing the core principles and revising the core principles of how we look at doctrine, of how we develop doctrine, of how we see doctrine. That is the problem. Men do not get all worked up and go online and talk about how bad fiducia supplicans is. Look at this. Keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah. Look at the. I mean, hopefully that's what we've been trying to do in this podcast. But it's important that we understand the true teaching of the Church and how it's being undermined today, and that helps us understand why things like Assisi 1, 2, and 3 take place. The whole Pachamama thing takes place. Why these popes have to feel like they have to show respect to all the different religions. They're on the ecumenical journey. They bought into the ecumenical movement, so they're in a process of dialogue. And so they show respect to these religions. Those religions show respect to us. But there's no question of conversion. There's no question of adhering to an objective truth that's revealed by God.
Right.
And the ultimate result is the loss of souls, because we're saved through the truths that Christ brought us to the world. What's the point of him coming if we don't need those truths? If really you can just believe whatever you want and call it good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it's wild. Well, this is fascinating. We're going to have notes in the description of the video and in the podcast description as well, so that you can read all of these documents and see what we've been referring to. But Father, thanks for taking the time to go through this. I have to confess, if you hadn't approached me about this, I wouldn't have even paid any attention to this document. It just seems like one more in a kind of ongoing kind of littering of documents that have been happening recently. But this one is really striking. And it's not fascinating or interesting to read, but it's really important to understand. Yeah.
As they say, I mean, it just really highlights that Pope Francis is not doing something new.
Yeah.
He's just simply executing the mandate of Vatican II.
Yeah.
So the problem's ultimately in the council itself.
It is. Father, thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to talking with you again soon.
Okay. My pleasure, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Questions with Father on the SSPX Podcast and on our YouTube page. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube account and to the podcasts on Apple Podcasts or wherever fine podcasts are found. And please consider leaving a rating or a review on the podcast. This will make sure that more people can find these episodes and discover the beauty and the truth of traditional Catholicism. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and God bless you.